What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, December 19th, 2018, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauahana Friday. And the weekend before Christmas, we're coming up on that. So I'm sure that Santa's, loading up that sleigh and getting things going there. Anyway, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Got a lot of talking points here. Mike is in the control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations. And let's just get right on into it. The top story, at least as far as I'm concerned, is apparently Donald Trump has given an order to the Pentagon to withdraw all U.S. forces from Syria as quickly as possible. And Trump wrote on Twitter saying, "We have defeated ISIS in Syria, which was my only reason for being there during the Trump presidency." Well, we know that ISIS was never the real reason for the war in Syria. It was to get Assad out and get a puppet regime in. So I'd say that they're trying to basically lose with grace and dignity on that one here. But yeah, that's a defeat. We did not achieve the real objectives there. Meanwhile, Lindsey Graham is out there screaming, "ISIS is not defeated, ISIS is not defeated." And he's out there saying, "Oh, this is a huge Obama-like mistake." He's channeling his inner McCain, I think. The liberal media is just absolutely furious. Of course, with the end of the war in Syria, that flood of Syrian refugees to Europe is going to get cut off. In fact, we've already been hearing that a lot of the Syrians who went to Europe now want to go back home. And that, of course, doesn't sit well with the globalists. Marco Rubio is out there throwing a conniption fit, saying that this will turn Syria over to Israel's greatest enemies, which I'm sure he means Iran. And there's an article over at Fort Russ saying, "Is the U.S. really withdrawing from Syria? And here is why not." And it's basically going on down and saying that, that this being in Syria to fight ISIS was a cover. And we all knew it was. We knew that the United States covertly created ISIS and supplied them and supported them. They were smuggling weapons from Libya to them. So what are they going to do about this? Well, there could be some kind of a false flag where Assad attacks a U.S. position and the U.S. says, well, we have to retaliate. But again, why would Assad do that? With the U.S. saying we're leaving, I'm sure that Assad, and for that matter Putin, and for that matter Ayatollah Khamenei are just going to stand there and just wave gently and say, goodbye, thanks for all the landmines, and, have a good day here. But it may be that they're pulling out of Syria primarily because they're regrouping for the attack on Iran, which seems to have a higher priority. But a lot of people are very concerned that there is going to be some kind of a major false flag over the Christmas holiday, over the New Year holiday. We know that Ukraine is apparently planning something along the Crimean border in, quote, the last 10 days of December. So it's really hard to get into that Christmas cheer thing, with the sort of Damocles hanging over all of our heads here. Now, speaking of Syria, a former serviceman of the Russian airborne troops, Alexander Dudchenko, has been killed by a mortar shelling in northern Latakia. And the incident took place in the town of Kinsaba, where Dudchenko came under fire from the Turkish-backed National Front for Liberation. And local sources say that he is among the Russian private military contractors that operate within the country. And apparently over the last few weeks, various pro-Turkish militant groups violated the ceasefire regime in the Idlib de-escalation zone multiple times. On some parts of the contact lines, such as northern Hama, they carried out limited ground attacks, which have all been repelled. So somebody wants this conflict to go on. Absolutely no question about that. Okay. Now then, here's a very interesting little story. This one came out of Sputnik News here. Syrian militants are creating hotbeds of terror in Africa. This coming from the Russian Security Council. And apparently a lot of these US-backed militant groups, following their defeats in Syria and Iraq, have been relocating to Africa. Gee, I wonder who picked up the airfare on that one. And they're creating these large enclaves of the Daesh terrorist group, Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram, to basically do to Africa what they've been trying to do to Syria and Iraq. And it's being described as a terrorist threat. But what is the United States going to do? Say, oh, we have to go into Africa now to fight ISIS, because that's what we're doing here. And maybe that's another reason they're pulling the troops out of Syria, is they're getting ready to go into Africa. Right now, we have more military actions going on in Africa than we do in the Middle East. And hardly anybody knows about them. It took everybody by surprise when that ambush in Niger killed 4 Americans. Now we're finding out that we're bombing Somalia. So here a war, there a war, everywhere a war, E-I-E-I-O. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Okay, getting up back to France, the Yellow Vests are occupying French highways. They're setting fire to toll booths, and they're already calling today Black Wednesday because it's a major midweek demonstration. And apparently it's already cost the road operator tens of millions of euros. It's sparking chaos in the transportation system just days before the Christmas holidays. That's bad optics. I think if there really was a leadership to the Yellow Vest movement, they should have perhaps had a rethink about that one. But apparently, according to France's largest toll road operator, Vincis Autoroutes, protesters are occupying some 40 sites across the network and damaging some intersections. And in particular, in Avignon, Orange, Perpignan, and Arras. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. You may not realize this, but a while back, the government of Emmanuel Macron started basically cutting the budget to the police forces because he needed the money to take care of the refugees, I guess. And because of the Yellow Vest protests, the police have come on back and said, we're overstressed, we're strained, we're not able to deal with this. And apparently Macron's government's response has been, well, there's really not much that we can do. They're proposing a €300 bonus to officers who are deployed to the actual protests. So this offer came a day after 2 of the police unions announced work slowdowns to protest staffing and other budget issues. So French police are threatening their own protest against Macron's government. So now we're going to have the Yellow Vests and we're going to have the Blue Vests. And I'm still thinking about that phone call we got yesterday talking about that video where the police were there with the Yellow Vests and the police just all took off their helmets and joined with them. And the person who was calling said that he was talking to somebody who was obviously a Macron supporter who just said, oh, well, those helmets are hot. And those officers all got hot at the same time. And that's the only reason they took off the helmets. They're not being friends with the Yellow Vests here. Now, here is where things are getting interesting. One of the major demands that is coming out of the Yellow Vests right now is a Frexit. They want out of the European Union. They're looking at how close Great Britain is to achieving that. And apparently Macron is considering changing French law to allow what he calls citizens' initiative referendums. In other words, if enough citizens sign enough petitions to put a Frexit referendum on the ballot, it will be so. And that's considered a major, major victory for the Yellow Vests. But behind it all, of course, what's driving this in France, in Belgium, in Netherlands, in Canada, here in the United States of America, who knows where all else this is taking off. What's fueling all this is the forced downward mobility of the middle class. Now, the middle class have been trying to basically, well, they've been in denial about the reality of their quality of life and their lifestyle. As the money junkies and the war economy siphon the wealth out of everybody's pockets, a lot of people who still think they're middle class are, in fact, below the threshold to be considered working or lower class. But they're finally waking up and realizing it and saying, yeah, we don't have the lives we used to have, and we didn't do anything to deserve this. And that's where the anger is coming from that is fueling the yellow vest movement. Taxes and prices keep going up, wages and pensions stagnate, and as a result of this, there's a decline in the standard of living. And people don't think their standard of living should be punished for things they didn't do. Okay, we're going to take a phone call here. Jim in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Love your show, my friend, always. Well, what I'm thinking, though, is that the yellow vest, okay, I think there's provocateurs that are sent by the government to cause other violence and stuff, okay?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. That's become a standard tactic to make them look bad.
Yeah, and he's like Ron Paul or whatever, but what I'm thinking, though, is that it's spreading so much, but I think the migrant issue is what is pushing everything, because these countries are losing their identity.
Yes.
With the migrant issue, you know, and that's the whole purpose of the migration thing, is to make everybody a third world country. And I just read an article too in Breitbart talking about in Sweden they're now having concerts where it's women only, and then they have a little section for men because of the rapes that are happening with the migrant raping everybody. Then you have judges getting the migrants who raped like a 13-year-old girl or something, going, well, you know, it's in their culture, so we can't find them guilty. So there's so many atrocities. So what I'm seeing now is that the yellow vests, okay, Michael, are actually the good people in France going, oh, come on, man, this is enough. And They want to violate us by bringing more migrants in. Excuse me. So there's going to be a revolution throughout Europe. And I'm just thinking that what I would do, and hopefully it will happen, is that we have the Muslims in our country. They don't. I live in Michigan. We have in downstate in Dearborn, we have the largest migrant population, okay?
Yes.
In the country. They do not assimilate. They push their issues, and I tell you what, they're really good at it. They have lots of babies and what have you, and then they'll take over the city council, then they'll start running for office and whatever, and we're going to see that. We have Sharia law everywhere, and I'm Polish, Kozlowski is my last name, and the Polish area of Detroit, okay, they have synagogues here now. Not synagogues, I'm sorry.
Mosques.
Muslim mosques, okay. They have those. They do the calls, you know, every day. But when I was young, Polish Town, okay, was really a cool place, but it's been taken over by Muslims. And there's so many malls down here, like the Mall of America or whatever, where it's all Muslims, and nobody ever goes to those malls anymore because it's horrible. I mean, so they are ruining our country. What I'm trying to think is that, you know what? What issue? I really, if I was president, I want to deport every Muslim in the whole country. What do you think about that? Because
I think that might actually happen when we start seeing the EU break up. that we're going to see this push to basically be a little more selective about who's going to be allowed to stay there. But you're right. This whole mass flooding of refugees into all of these European countries and into the United States, it's an attack on our culture and our national identity. And you're right. That's probably another aspect of what's driving the yellow vests.
What I have a problem with is that, when all chaos breaks out and we have this big Muslim in Dearborn, we've got a large Muslim population there. We're going to have to battle these people because they're all extremists. They want to change our society. And the whole point is that when you come into our society, you assimilate, but they don't. They come in to change your society. And I kind of like the way we are now. I mean, we have problems and everything, but you know what? I'm going to have this. I mean, George Bush is the one who, George Bush Sr. is one of the Republican Guard. They brought all these people in. Remember those?
Yes.
So he brought all these people in Dearborn, Michigan. Now we have we have a big Muslim population there, but I tell you what, if you go in there with the Bible, they'll kill your ass, I'm sorry. It's like, Muslims, good, but you know what? You aren't going to assimilate. Go back to your old country. We have to get all these people out. Europe has to get all those people out. If not, there's going to be total chaos, which is what they brought them in for. They brought them in for chaos.
And it's all George Soros' fault.
Well, and it could be the European leaders or whatever, but I guess the whole point is that Muslims will never assimilate.
There's a lot of globalists out there, but Soros' money is what made it possible.
Yeah, and whether it be, why isn't that guy arrested, Mike? I'm kind of wondering about that.
I don't know. A lot of his actions here in the United States of America, where he does live, he's a citizen here, like supporting groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter, are clear violations of the USA Patriot Act. The use of violence or the threat of violence to coerce a change in somebody's political views is defined as an act of terror in the USA Patriot Act.
Well, what I'm thinking is he may be being directed by the CIA and maybe the FBI too. But
I'm sure they're working together hand in glove. Yeah.
They have to. He couldn't do this stuff if they weren't hand in glove. So I hope Trump gets it together. I love the guy. He's done a lot of good, but I tell you what, he's got a lot of obstacles, and most of them are his staff. Okay, the people he hires, and Congress that we keep electing the idiots through rigged elections and stuff. So, my goodness. But Michael, we've solved maybe 1/64 of the world's problems here tonight. But anyways, always good to talk to you, and God bless you. Merry Christmas. I know it's not politically correct, and Happy New Year, my friend.
Well, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you as well here, and I don't care about being politically correct anymore. Actually, I never did, to be very honest about it. Thank you for the phone call. We're coming up on a commercial, and I'm going to fit in one quick news story. We've got another caller waiting on the line. Do you remember back when this situation came up that the BBC was directing their reporter who was covering the Yellow Vest protest in France to try and find a connection to Russia, find some way to say this is all Russia's fault? Well, Russia has now formally complained, issuing a statement from the Russian embassy. And the statement calls for regulatory bodies should evaluate BBC's news coverage of disorder in Paris. Well, we already know BBC's news coverage is junk. Remember, they reported the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7 26 minutes before it happened. We got to take a break for commercials. Back with a phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones here to Tom in Florida. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good day, Michael. Happy holiday season. Yes, Merry Christmas. Yeah, Michael, the last caller is right on the money. The main word I think he's trying to get to is that they're trying to...
Whoops. Hello? I think we lost Tom. Okay, so let's see. All right. Now, the United States is confirming they are pulling out from the INF Treaty, and Russia had been saying over the last few days their attempts to start negotiations with the United States to keep that treaty in place were not being responded to. So Washington has confirmed its decision. They will withdraw from the INF Treaty, and the decision is final. Russia's deputy foreign minister has said that Moscow will take measures if American missiles that threaten its security are placed in Europe. And that's how we got into that whole mess with like the Cuban Missile Crisis. So now one senior Russian diplomat is saying the INF Treaty cannot be suspended. It can only be violated. And Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said in an interview with the Kommersant Daily that basically, for all intents and purposes, the United States is in violation of the treaty. Okay, Tom is now back, and Tom, let's pick up where you left off.
Yes, Michael, I believe your last caller is what he was getting at, and I believe you get a lot of times, is they're trying to change the demographics of the country. That's the main word that people need to understand, is the changing of the demographics. And by these rich billionaires, you got this guy Slim, and of course Soros and all these other guys starting the country. But Michael, I don't know if you saw the news today about the young girl, the little girl who got killed at the border, and they're blaming Trump. It's all Trump's fault because she died of starvation and thirst. Why isn't Mexico being held responsible? Their southern border got breached and they came through that southern border. That little girl died not because of Donald Trump in the United States. She died because of the Mexican government allowed that.
Well, I hold her parents as ultimately responsible. I hold her parents as ultimately to blame because they were the ones who made the decision to bring her along while they committed the crime of breaching Mexico's border and then trying to breach the United States border. And
correct, Michael, but Mexico could have stopped it. Mexico had a quicker chance to stop it than the United States. Stop her from coming in getting to the southern border of the United States. I totally agree with you. You're 100% correct. But yeah, Michael, in talking about France, I had a family member came back from Paris. He told me it looked like something out of it looked like Baghdad, or it was like it looked like it's some kind of Paris, France is gone, according to my family member told me. It's like it's all Muslims over there.
Yes.
Basically, everywhere you go in France. And your last caller, he's absolutely right. They're trying to bring Sharia law. I can tell you, Michael, here in South Florida, I'm in South Florida. We don't have one white Anglo on the Miami Commission, the Dade Commission. Broward County, I believe, only has 4 commissioners left. But in Dade County, there's not one white male commissioner. The only one, the white person they have on the Dade County Commission is of Jewish persuasion. The rest, there's none. You check it out. The Dade County Commission, there's not one white Anglo male.
I remember.
When I was a young man,
I remember there was a story a while back out in California where there is actually an illegal immigrant who's sitting on the city council of one of the cities out there. And I mean, that is just utterly absurd. We always talk about dual loyalty, and, we already understand that a lot of these migrants who are coming to this country, they are not loyal to this country. They're loyal to at least their families and friends back home, and they're going to do things to help them, not the American people. It really is a totally messed up situation.
Well, Michael, here in Florida, they're flying their own flags. You got the Venezuelans flying their flags all over Doral. Of course, the Cubans, and then you got Colombians. All these people are coming here. They have their own flags. They fly their own flags on their houses and put their stickers on their cars. And it's like, wow, what is this? You came here to become an American, but evidently that's not the case. And this is nothing but an invasion to change the demographics. Like I said, we know who's behind it, basically. We know who's behind this invasion. And you got this guy Schumer, the Senator Schumer in New York. They're saying, well, we're not going to give Trump no funding for the wall. But in the meantime, we gave Israel multiple hundreds of millions of dollars to build a wall around Israel.
Yes, we did.
That doesn't make sense to me.
We absolutely did. And the demographic change was visible in the midterm elections because the illegals were flooding into all these different districts in California. And they're saying that's why so many of those California districts went from being Republican to Democrat. And why the House of Representatives lost so many seats there. Not because the Californians changed their mind about the party, but because these illegals were being flooded into these areas and being allowed to vote. Anyway, listen, Wayne.
Yes, Michael, absolutely right. And listen, Michael, the bottom line is they're coming. These illegals that are coming here, they're voting Democrat. 90% of them are going to be Democrats in the future.
They are.
So,
Tom, I got to let you go. Tom, I got to let you go. Got to do a commercial break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And the phone lines are really loading up here. We're going to go to Wayne in West Virginia. Aloha, Wayne. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Can you hear me okay, buddy?
I hear you just fine.
Good. This is the first time I've probably listened to your show. And in the beginning, I was listening to what you had to say. And to be honest with you, I had to say, right on, right on, right on. When it comes to the Middle East and Syria, first thing I said when I heard it was that, well, he's just pulling them out of there to get them rested up for the next phase. He'll be sending them somewhere else.
Yes.
And to be quite honest with you, American people don't realize it, most of them don't anyway, is that our biggest enemy out there is none other than Israel. Israel's enemies should be our friends.
Yes.
And most of our friends, all we've done is run them off because they can't trust us anymore because of Israel.
Yes. I mean,
go ahead.
We're constantly being told that Israel is our only friend in the Middle East, but prior to the creation of Israel, we didn't have very many enemies at all in the Middle East. We got along fine with everybody.
Yeah, you got to give them credit. I mean, they have Christians killing Muslims, Muslims killing Christians, and they're making money. And as far as they're concerned, it's just animals killing animals, because that's what we're there for, is to die for Israel.
Well, the way things are going with all of these mass migrations here in Europe and the United States, it could wind up with Christians and Muslims killing each other in the streets of Europe and America. And I certainly don't want to see that, but it seems almost like it's headed that way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And when it comes to Trump, I've never been a Trump night, and I'm sure the hell wasn't a Hillary night. So I didn't care for either one of them. But at the same token, what I see out of Trump, it's the old game. What they do is, with his followers, anything that they don't like, it's not Trump's fault. It's that liberal judge, or it's the Democrats, or it's the Mexicans, or it's always somebody else. Not poor old Trump. We got to defend him. And then every once in a while, he'll throw him a bone and keep him in line. So it's a, good cop, bad cop type of thing. So I don't have much confidence there, but I did enjoy your show and listening to you because you were right on, my friend. And I know you got a lot of callers, so I'll let you go, and thanks a lot.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot for the call, and thanks for the compliments here. And we're going to switch over to Layla in Ontario. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, hi, Mike. I was listening to Jim from Michigan, and it really hit home because I used to go to Michigan, and Hamtramck is the area that was for the Polish community. There was a beautiful Greek town. There was a Hispanic town. All of Detroit, the whole area was a wonderful place. Now, with regard to the Muslims that are there now and all over the world, those that have come en masse together do indeed present a terrible danger. Now, I'm a Christian from Bethlehem. My ancestry is that we have been in Bethlehem for forever, according to my DNA ancestry. And yet, even though that was the birthplace of Christianity, we were dominated by the Muslims. And because they outnumbered the Christians, eventually our culture, our social values had to adapt to the Muslims. Even to the point of not being able to say things As a child, if I asked questions, I would be told, "Cut your tongue." It is a very difficult culture. Christians and radical, extremist, fanatical Muslims simply do not mix. Now, in defense of the Muslims who've been here a long time, they came in small groups and were forced to assimilate. But when they come in large groups, they're almost like a fort. They band together, get their people elected, and enact a strategy, much like the Jews did around the time of Grover Cleveland as president. When Jacob Schiff brought in a lot of Russian Jews,
Yes.
and Grover Cleveland did not enact the law that was supposed to require all immigrants speak English, Jacob Schiff bribed Grover Cleveland, got him a second term, and he removed that requirement that they speak English before they come. So they came en masse and created the bulk of the Democratic Party, and that has continued. When I called yesterday and said that I think Americans have gone against this government, it is betraying the people who made America what it was. The Western Christian values are the best social values to enable harmony within different groups. But the Muslims simply cannot, when they come in large groups, and mind you, not all of them, this is what we have to keep in mind, a lot of the Muslims are not from the Middle East. They are not necessarily Arabic speaking. The ones that come from the poorer third world countries outside of the Middle East are often the more radical, violent Muslims. And yes, Israel is driving the conflict. They want to rid the Middle East of the extreme Muslims so that Israel will have an easier time of taking over all the resources there. And what they're also doing is creating chaos over here so that nobody here in the Western world can stop what they're doing. I just hope that, with Christmas coming up, this is a very difficult time. We've been denied so much of our own values and our own culture, and it's wonderful to hear you say Merry Christmas. And the other thing too that really bothers me is what has happened in Bethlehem with the Muslims governing the West Bank and dominating. They've driven out all the Christians. I mean, there are very few Christians left. My relatives have left because the Muslims are so dominant. But the whole idea, Christmas for us used to be prayer and worship. Our lives used to focus around the Church of the Nativity. We never had Christmas trees and were obsessed with spending money and buying gifts. It was a time simply for worship and to pray for the peace, the hope that was symbolized by the birth of Christ. So that's basically what I have to say. Jim is absolutely right. I didn't hear what Tom said from Florida, but I think he said much the same thing, because I think a lot of them are in that area as well, where the weather is warm. But yes, Michigan needs special attention, and people have got to demand the government stop migrants from coming in and destroying the wonderful culture that the U.S. created. Anyway,
the
that's all I
people
have
are
to say.
demanding their governments stop this, and the governments are refusing to do it. I mean, look how hard Pelosi and Schumer fought against Trump's, budget request for the wall. They absolutely want those borders open. They want more of those illegal immigrants to come on in to maintain a lock on power. The GOP, as a political force in this country, is about to go extinct. They'll never win an election again, because all the illegal immigrants are going to come on in. They're all going to vote, even though they're supposed to. And the Democrats are going to campaign on, we're going to take stuff away from the legal American citizens who've been here all their lives, and we're going to give them to all you newcomers.
And that's the outrage. Not only is it destroying the culture, taking away the inheritance rights of all the Americans whose parents built this country, they're going to be giving everything that it's essentially they're acting like thieves, middlemen, yes, to steal from the rightful citizens who built the country, both in the U.S. and Canada, and they're giving it to the migrants. They and they're going to be immune from what's going to happen because they all live behind the walls that protect them.
Yes.
Walls do work.
Oh yeah, you should see
Anything,
the wall that's around Nancy Pelosi's estate here. But you know, those who rob Peter to pay Paul are always going to have the political
and the
support of Paul.
Vatican. And let's not forget the wall around the Vatican.
True.
Where with this communist Pope Francis demanding that the Muslims be let in. I don't know whether it's a communist ideology that's behind it or the Zionist ideology, and I suspect they're one and the same. It's just brutal. I would, at the risk of sounding religiously fanatical, I would say it's evil. It's terrifying. And you know, as Christians, we came to North America to escape the tyranny of Islam. Now to have it happening here is like a nightmare. And mind you, a lot of the moderate Muslims, the reasonable Muslims, are themselves terrified by the extremists who are being brought here. So
yes.
It's got to stop. The question is how. How do the people do it absent violent action? And violence is a terrible resort because it's unpredictable. You have no way to know which way it will go. And the weakest are going to suffer the most. It's just a terrible dilemma. The treachery of the U.S. government is unbelievable. But anyway, thank you for at least allowing people to say Merry Christmas. And I take great pleasure in saying Merry Christmas, have a happy holiday, and I will talk to you some other time. Thank you, Mike.
All right, well, thank you very much. We're going to let you go, and we're going to switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I'm not going to talk about anything religious, Mike. That girl who died from the one on the border died of sepsis. And another thing is, Mike, with the withdrawal from Syria, if you looked and read, it just says there's going to be a different phase of the campaign. So the campaign, if it's still Syria, that means they're switching over to something else in Syria. So it's not over yet. And they're also, it says 24 hours, they're going to withdraw the diplomats. That's coming from Reuters. So I don't know how truthful that is. And let me see. Oh, and then I don't know if you heard about the. What is that?
I said that's not good news. I mean, are they desperate enough to try a decapitation strike against Assad? And they want the American troops out of the way in case, because obviously the Syrian Arab army and possibly even the Russians would start going after those American assets, figuring that a major attack was on.
But they couldn't do it against Assad. Damascus is protected by the S-400s. I mean, it'd be ludicrous. It's just maybe they're up to something else. I mean, I don't know. These people are pretty sneaky at what they can accomplish. But Mike, did you hear about a hacked EU cable saying that Russia may have nuclear arms in Crimea? Well, I mean, I know Sevastopol. I mean, it's a naval base, so if they have subs there, obviously they're nuclear capable.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of propaganda. Russia's got nuclear weapons here, Russia's got nuclear weapons there. I mean, I don't know if you heard anything on that.
Well, it makes perfect sense that Russia's submarines are nuclear capable and are carrying some weapons along that line. But this is more of the propaganda that's fanning up this coming conflict between Ukraine and Russia along the Crimean border, which everybody seems to know is coming in the last 10 days of December, this month. And, Russia is deploying warplanes and additional assets to Crimea to try and deter Ukraine from doing something. But the propaganda is continuing. And it does look like there's going to be a new flashpoint there. And that might be another reason why they're pulling the troops out of Syria. They're getting ready to send them up to Ukraine, because the Ukrainian army has very low morale. They're not committed to the fight. There's been a major desertion problem. Poroshenko almost doesn't really have an army. So maybe the U.S. is getting ready to basically just move the army from Syria to Ukraine. That could be another explanation.
And I just heard that a lot of younger people that were supposed to show up for service, they're fleeing the country.
Yes.
In Ukraine.
Yes.
So and Mike, real quick, 0.25 basis points rise, 900. I don't know what it ended, but the Dow dumped. We need to stay on topic, people. The stock market crashing 900 points, not crashing, but dumping 900 points, and what's going on in Ukraine, Syria is I hate to say more important than what's going on with the it's important with the people coming into the country, but you know what I mean? It's like there's a lot of stuff going on right this minute when it comes to economics.
Okay, the Dow did not drop 900. It ended up down 351.
Okay, our stuff didn't get the final tally there, but because that's from like him raising those 20.25 basis points, which is not a lot, right?
Well, there's also the deterioration in the trade talks with China. I mean, there's a lot of factors. Plus, there might be some people who are just profit-taking because they need to do their Christmas shopping. Anyway, Dustin, I got a lot of callers, and I really do need to get back to the news, so I'm going to let you go, and we're going to switch over to Kathleen in Paris. Aloha, Kathleen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Well, about pulling out of Syria. Trump, when they said we came there for ISIS and that's done now, that almost sounds like reverse psychology or something, like what you said, we were going in there to get ISIS. Because I think even he knows that we created ISIS. We are ISIS.
I don't know that he knows that. He seems seriously out of touch with a lot of what the government has been doing. In fact, there was an article in the UK Independent saying that President Trump may be the dimmest president we've ever had, and I'm starting to agree. And he's just relying on his White House advisors, who have been feeding him. ISIS is bad, because, again, that connection between the U.S. And Libya and ISIS as the arms supply chain, that certainly hasn't appeared on corporate media or Twitter. Anyway, Kathleen, stay on the line. We're going to put you on hold. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Kathleen in Paris. And Kathleen, sorry to cut you off so soon, but we do have to do these commercials to stay in business. And again, what's on your mind?
Well, I want to say that France is still France. The baguettes are here, the cheese is here, the wine is here. And in fact, it's a lovely time to visit because there are less tourists because of all this hoopla with the yellow jackets. But I had a friend visit Paris about 10 days ago because it was on a Sunday. He arrived on a Sunday, and he went to the Arc de Triomphe. And to be honest, that was one place I would not go.
Yes.
Because I kind of thought, I thought it's fine here and where I am, and in the very center, Saint Michel and Châtelet and all that is not a problem. But he said that the day after the big Saturday protest, that it was fine. It was all cleaned up. Now that is not an eyewitness report, but that is a first-hand report from somebody, a friend of mine who went there and saw that the day after the big protest, he saw no problem. So I don't know. I just hate to see France reported as finished, and because in fact France is more than Paris. There's a lot of wonderful things to see and do in France, and I had to give that little report.
Well, thank you for that little update. Of course, Claire has been to Paris, and she absolutely loved it there. But looking at photos of it today, and this is from before the yellow vests, she said she could see the deterioration from all the refugees that were coming on in, all the trash and everything. And it is a shame because, as we can tell from you, the French are very proud of their country and their city, as they ought to be. as we all ought to be proud of our country, which I realize is a nationalist statement, which makes me an enemy of the globalists and the corporate media. Anyway, listen, Kathleen, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're going to take one more phone call, and then we got to close the lines because I'm falling way behind on my talking points. Neil in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Merry Christmas, Michael Clare in the United States of America.
Merry Christmas to you.
I got up early this morning to go do my shopping routine. Living up on the mountain takes literally half to three-quarters of a day. I read a little bit of news about yesterday's trial with Judge Sullivan, and my jaw dropped.
Yes.
So, literally, this was supposed to go to trial 2-3 weeks ago. The FBI has, everybody knows the NSA has the phone records of what actually happened that day.
Okay, well, little bit of a correction. Little bit of a correction here. There is no trial because Flynn pled guilty. What was supposed to happen this last week was the sentencing hearing. That has now been delayed into next year. But Judge Sullivan did make a lot of mistakes. And there's...
The words he was saying was utterly bizarre.
It was. Anyway, listen, Neil, I got to let you go. We got to do station identification, and then I'm going to come back for hour number 2, and we're going to do some news here. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2, and we've closed the phone lines. We may reopen them in hour number 3, but I really do have to get some news here. Russia, as mentioned before, is deploying fighter jets to Crimea, and they're sending the Sukhoi 27 and Sukhoi 30, and it's going to be a permanent deployment. And again, Russia is saying their information is that Poroshenko is getting ready to do some kind of a provocation along the border with Crimea. Now, despite the threats of war in the Donbass, the United States is continuing weapons deliveries to Ukraine. Well, it's not despite threats of war. The U.S. wants a war in the Donbass. The U.S. is trying to encroach closer and closer to Russia, trying to provoke a Russian response so they can say, bad Russians, no vodka. So apparently moving through Congress is a military financing package of around $250 million and the ability to sell additional equipment. This came from Volker to reporters in Brussels. And he went on out and said Ukraine is under attack from Russia and defended a Western military presence near or even within that country to raise the visibility of Russians' actions. So there is the giveaway. They're talking about U.S. forces in Ukraine. That's what they're getting ready to do. That may be where the troops who are currently in Syria are about to be sent here. Now, General Dynamics, which is a big defense contractor, and they're out there whining and crying over the fact that Canada is considering scrapping the Saudi arms deal over the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And General Dynamics is saying this is going to cost billions of dollars. It's going to be, huge amounts. And apparently they're getting ready to say that Canada would be liable for those losses. So they want the deal to keep on going. Now, a little bit of good news down in Yemen. The ceasefire, for the most part, is holding, and the city of Hodeida is calm. The ceasefire took full effect. Both sides are accusing each other of violations, and there's been a bit of gunfire, but generally calm has prevailed. And hopefully this is going to allow the United Nations to get some supplies through those humanitarian corridors and to those people who desperately need it. Now, under this truth, both sides are to withdraw all forces from Hodeida and the surrounding area within 21 days. There is no sign yet such redeployment is happening, which is likely a function of neither side trusting the other to honor the truce from the start, except that the Houthis are saying that they don't think the deal is final. They're claiming the United Nations has made this announcement and just expects everybody to go along with it. But in point of fact, the talks are still continuing. And somebody needs to send a memo to Saudi Arabia, which is still sending in airstrikes. As I mentioned before, the United States is now bombing Somalia. And apparently, over the last weekend, they carried out 6 airstrikes against the coastal town of Garndarsh. Now, AFRICOM says 62 people were killed in these strikes, and all were terrorists from al-Shabaab. Well, when you're bombing from the air and you're in a populated area, yeah, you're going to be killing civilians. So, another lie here. Over in Pakistan, apparently, a Pakistani court has sentenced 2 Christians in Punjab to death for the crime of blasphemy following their arrest back in 2015. And apparently these 2 brothers, Qusar and Amun Ayub, were accused in 2011 of posting material offensive to Islam on their website and subsequently sent to the Jhelum prison in Lahore in 2015. Qusar testified that he'd shut down the offending website in 2009, but that a Muslim acquaintance of his had resurrected the site, keeping the copyright in Qusar's name. So it went back and forth, and apparently on the 13th of this month, Judge Javed Iqbal Bosal heard the case in the Jhelum prison for security reason, declared the brothers guilty, and sentenced them to death. These men are married. Qusar is the father of 3 children. So this killing of each other over whose version of the imaginary playmate in the sky is the correct one, I think it's a mental illness. In fact, I would have to say that it's a contagious mental illness, and it does seem to be infecting much of the world here. Now, Japan, which for pretty much the entire period after World War II swore off being military aggressors, they had defensive forces only, that seems to be changing. Because on the 11th of this month, Kyodo News Agency reported Japan plans to effectively upgrade its helicopter carriers to enable them to transport and launch fighter jets. Now, this would basically make these helicopter carriers, which have a straight deck, function like World War II aircraft carriers. They're not going to have an angled deck, but still, it's very, very significant that Japan is now starting to think about this kind of power projection. And these developments were reported in the same week as the anniversary of the Nanking Massacre of 1937 and 38, which remembrance went totally unreported by the corporate media, but it's certainly remembered in China, where over a period of 6 weeks, Imperial Japanese Army forces brutally murdered hundreds of thousands of people and wreaked further death and destruction there and throughout Asia until they lost the war in 1945. And of course, this month there was another anniversary, which was that of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Over in North Korea, they have declared that they will not agree to denuclearization if the vicious U.S. actions continue. And in a press statement from the Policy Research Director of Institute of American Studies from North Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the regime expressed its shock and indignation at the continued commitment by the United States of vicious anti-North Korea hostile actions. And they're complaining about how virtually every day they've slandered North Korea out of sheer malice. Now, possibly in response to that, possibly in response to the need to show they're doing something, the U.S. is now seeking to expedite aid for North Korea. And they're going to try and expedite humanitarian aid up to North Korea and see if that can restart the stalled nuclear talks. All righty. Over in Israel, the Israeli government deal with the Hamas party was done to undermine the incentive for Palestinian security coordination. And as the Israeli military is dragged in to implement colonial policing and the atrocities start to pile up, popular support among the Palestinians for Hamas is growing, and they have never been stronger. So their divide and conquer attempt failed rather miserably. Two of the U.S. Senate's most conservative members proposed a non-binding resolution on Tuesday encouraging U.S. recognition of Israeli sovereignty in the Golan Heights as punishment for Bashar Assad in Syria, because he gassed his own people. That's, again, the big lie. He gassed his own people, so we're going to give the Golan to Israel. And I read this story, and I'm thinking to myself, isn't it wonderful that things are so good in the United States that our members of Congress have lots of free time to worry about Israel? I mean, you would think U.S. senators would have a lot of items on their desks to deal with, items that are important to the American people, things that are important to the country as a whole, things that are important, for example, to the economy. But apparently, no. Apparently, their desks are clear. So they're sitting back there and they're saying, I'm getting bored. What am I going to do here? Well, I don't know. Let's do something nice for Israel. Anyway. As you know, the Knesset is advancing legislation to legalize 66 outposts deep in the West Bank. Now, people like to refer to the illegal settlements. They're all illegal under international law. But in Israel, the settlements are the settlements, the ones that the Israeli government has authorized, the ones where Israelis have just gone on in and set up their own settlement without permission. They're called the outposts. And right now, the Knesset is looking at this law to retroactively legalize 66 of them. And there has been virtually no response whatsoever from the Trump administration. Basically, all we're getting from the White House is no comment. Now, Israel is lodging furious protests with Russia over its recent invitation to Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh to visit Moscow later this month. And the objections were raised both by Israel's embassy in Moscow and in conversations with the Russian embassy in Tel Aviv. Russian officials have rejected the complaints, noting that Israel was itself talking to Hamas, albeit indirectly, and the Hamas delegation is expected in Moscow in late December. Now, over at the Arab League, they have adopted a resolution calling on Australia and Brazil to abide by international law concerning the status of Jerusalem. And it came after Brazil's president-elect Jair Bolsonaro announced in November his intention to move Brazil's embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Last Saturday, Australia announced its recognition of West Jerusalem as Israel's capital, although a contentious embassy shift from Tel Aviv will not occur until a peace settlement is achieved. Now, both Israel and Palestine claim Jerusalem as their capital. Israel's supposed to get West Jerusalem. Palestine is supposed to get East Jerusalem. Israel wants it all. That's been the problem all along. If Israel would grant to Palestine that which it demands for itself, recognition of a right to exist, all of this bloodshed over the last decades could have been avoided. Israel's always complaining about all the nations in the Middle East who refuse to recognize it. They're all ready to do so. They've already stated they're ready to recognize Israel the moment Israel recognizes Palestine. And there is the impasse. Up in Alaska, the U.S. Navy is considering whether to deploy submarine hunting P-8 Poseidon aircraft to a Cold War-era base in Alaska in an effort to keep a closer eye on Chinese and Russian movements in the Arctic. They're going to start fighting over the ice, I guess, here. And so the Russians are warming up 5 airstrips. and 10,000 Spetsnaz troops in the Arctic for quote-unquote search and rescue. The Chinese are up there. Everybody is up there. U.S. Navy Secretary Richard Spencer told lawmakers last week. Everybody but us fired back Alaska Senator Dan Sullivan. So, oh good, they've got a new place to fight over. All righty. Putin has come on out with a statement saying that he hopes that Russia's advanced weapons will make those accustomed to militarist rhetoric stop and think. I certainly hope the same thing. And he's saying these weapons are there to ensure Russia's security and will hopefully force those who've been accustomed to militarist rhetoric to think. Putin told the Defense Ministry's expanded board meeting on Tuesday. And he said there's been a serious breakthrough made in the developing advanced and unparalleled weapons, and I hope our newest systems will give everybody pause there. Now, serial production of the avant-garde hypersonic missile system has been launched, and successful tests of Russia's most advanced Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile have been successfully carried out. The Kinzhal air-launched precision hypersonic weapon is on combat duty right now. So is the Peresvet combat lasers. They're actually out there deployed and in use here. So, looking at a new report from the Government Accountability Office, they are warning that the United States' current ballistic missile defense system is powerless against these new hypersonic missiles from China and Russia. And they're saying the missile's speed, altitude, and maneuverability could defeat all networked sensors, including space-based and ground and sea-based radars, ground and sea-based interceptor missiles, and render the Pentagon's command-control battle management ineffective in the event of a hypersonic missile attack. And the report said China and Russia are pursuing these weapons because of their speed, altitude, and maneuverability to defeat these missile systems. And they may be used to improve long-range conventional and nuclear strike capabilities. That's true. Some of these hypersonic weapons can be mounted on a rocket. Now, the big issue, of course, is that America's entire anti-ballistic missile system is built around a doctrine of a ballistic incoming threat. It's following a predictable curve in the sky where you can track it on radar and know that it will be at position XYZ in 5 seconds' time, and you can guide a missile to hit it. These new hypersonic weapons, and for that matter, the new MIRV warheads that Russia has developed, don't do that. They maneuver. They weave back and forth, they dipsy-doodle, they corkscrew through the sky, and that makes predicting where they're going to be impossible. The Russians and the Chinese simply designed around the U.S. ballistic missile system's assumptions. Now here's a good one. The U.S. military's Naval Research Laboratory is developing genetically engineered organisms that it hopes will be able to detect the presence of any enemy submarines, ships, or divers. This was published in Defense One. The work is part of a $45 million initiative across all the branches of the U.S. Armed Forces that is investigating ocean-based military applications for genetic engineering. Now, Motherboard had previously reported on the military's plans to use larger aquatic animals to detect enemy ships, but now they're looking to weaponize biology on the microscale. Given how slow microbes swim, I'm not sure how useful this is really going to be. I remember some years ago, there was actually a program in San Diego where they had a pod of dolphins that were trained to basically detect submarines and plant limpet mines on them. And the program apparently didn't work out all that well, and it was eventually canceled. and all the dolphins were released into the ocean, and the captains of all those tuna boats got very, very nervous. Now, here's another story, and it could be booga booga, but apparently, according to this headline that came out in Newsweek, China and Russia have modified the atmosphere above Europe to test possible military applications. And they're basically saying that this was what the sort of a follow-on to the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program known as HARP. And they're saying that a Russian antenna array heated the ionosphere over Europe, and then a Chinese satellite flying overhead measured the results. Now, if China and Russia did this, it would be top secret. I don't see how they would announce it. So I think this is more China and Russia bashing. We'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to our show. And if you would like to help out Republic Broadcasting, and believe me, they really do need your help, I'd get down on my knees and beg you all, but it would take a forklift to get me back up. The postal address where you can send check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit or debit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during normal business hours, extension 3 at all other times. And folks, we've all been good little girls and boys, and we need a little something in our Christmas stocking. So please put us on your Christmas gift list. And the network thanks you. Okay, let's get into some of our domestic politics because there's a lot going on. And we all saw this coming here. Basically, a top Democrat is now confirming that when they take control of the House of Representatives, all of the investigations into the FBI or the Department of Justice, they're going to go away. And there will be no more investigations into wrongdoing by the FBI or the Department of Justice. And for the last couple of months with all the stonewalling, we knew they were running out the clock. And that they knew the Democrats were going to win the House of Representatives with, illegal immigrant voting. And they're off the hook. They got away with it all. So, okay. Apparently, Republican Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Richard Burr and Ranking Democrat member Mark R. Wagner, they've got Jerome Corsi in their sights, along with Donald Trump. And apparently, they are demanding to produce a wide-ranging array of documents and then testify again on alleged Russian collusion. And Burr and Warner are both strong supporters of Special Counsel Mueller. Their motivations are clearly transparent. They're trying to keep this story alive. And the demand basically requires that all documentation already produced by Dr. Corsi to Mueller be produced to them, as opposed to simply going over to Mueller's office and say, can I use your Xerox machine? And apparently, it's just going. Anyway, basically, Jerome Corsi came back and said the Senate Intelligence Committee can take a hike. All right. Now, the anti-Trump resistance is seizing on Judge Sullivan's misunderstanding of the Flynn case. And there were some noteworthy things about what happened during the sentencing hearing, where U.S. District Judge Emmett G. Sullivan made several false statements about the fundamentals of Flynn's case. And in addition, he also violated one of the prime requirements of a judge. He revealed he had a bias. He was clearly hostile toward Flynn. And judges aren't supposed to be that way. So, now, Hans von Spakovsky, a Heritage Foundation senior legal fellow, explained how the FBI did, in fact, entrap former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. They used electronic surveillance, and he was offering his remarks on a Tuesday interview with Breitbart News. And von Spakovsky said the entire basis of the claim against Flynn is that he supposedly lied to FBI agents who were sent to the White House without following the usual procedures, which Comey openly admits, to interview him about telephone conversations he had with the Russian ambassador. Now, when the FBI agents talked to Flynn, they did not tell him it was a formal interview. They did not Mirandize him. They didn't remind him it's a crime to lie to the FBI. Flynn just thought they were there for a chit-chat. And then there were all those games they played with those FD 302 forms. Now, former FBI Director James Comey is now claiming that the reason he dispatched these two agents to interview Mike Flynn was because Flynn had told Vice President Mike Pence information that didn't square with classified information he had reviewed. And so he wanted to interview Michael Flynn as part of a counterintelligence mission. And Comey is now saying that President Trump asked him to let the Flynn matter go, which, if he could prove that, that would be obstruction of justice. And meanwhile, of course, Comey is continuing to falsely claim that it was the Republicans who started that Christopher Steele dossier during the primary season to get Trump out of the running. And then the Democrats took it over. There's been no documentation for that. Got to take another break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And speaking of the Christopher Steele dossier, as you know, BuzzFeed was the first platform, if you will, to put out the news about the Steele dossier. And inside that dossier, Russian businessman Alexei Gubarev was named as being involved in all of this, and as it turns out, he wasn't. He sued BuzzFeed last year for defamation, and BuzzFeed was dealt a major blow in court yesterday after a judge decided that Alexei is not a public figure. And so public figures typically need to be able to prove the more demanding standard of actual malice when bringing a libel suit. Non-public figures need only prove negligence. And so it looks like BuzzFeed is in serious, serious trouble over this one. Got to be very careful about what you say about people. Now, James Comey has had his second day behind closed doors, and Trey Gowdy really grilled Comey on his vastly different handling of comments by Trump and Obama. And when Trump asked Comey whether he could see his way clear to easing up on Flynn, Comey memorialized the conversation in a memo, distributed it to the leadership team, including Andrew McCabe and James Baker. However, when President Obama on 60 Minutes publicly exonerated Hillary Clinton's mishandling of classified information, setting the stage for true obstruction of justice, Comey did nothing. He never talked to the president about obstruction, he never memorialized his observations, and he didn't leak anything to the press. They were things that he did with Trump, not Obama. It's a true double standard. Democrats get the Wall Street bankster treatment, everybody else gets tossed into the slammer. And by the way, you know, James Comey's got to be suffering a tremendous amount of amnesia because of all the times he said he couldn't remember something or he had no recollection. And it's kind of hard to imagine a man with a brain that faulty rising to the top of the FBI. But then in looking at all these hearings of all of these people, there must be something in the drinking water that melts the brain in Washington, D.C., because nobody in Washington, D.C. seems to have a memory. They can't remember anything. Remember Hillary Clinton? Same thing. I don't recall. I don't remember. I have no specific recollection. we have a government being run by mentally damaged people here. Now, Rand Paul is considering a law banning lobbyists working for foreign governments, which I think would be a great idea. And he went on to say, I don't like the idea that Saudi Arabia spends tens of millions of dollars every year hiring people for their interests. Their ambassadors should come to our capital, tell us what the interests of Saudi Arabia are. I think it's unseemly, and a lot of people could potentially be hired that aren't working in our country's interests. Now, it's a good idea. It's not going to go anywhere, because a law that would ban lobbyists working for Saudi Arabia would also ban lobbyists working for Israel, and Israel will never, ever, ever let that happen. Okay. The Foundation for Accountability and Civic Trust just published its annual list of the worst ethics violators in Washington, and 2 Democrats who are expected to run in 2020 made the list. One is Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, and the other is California Senator Kamala Harris. And both made the list for fundraising off their obstruction of Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. And by the way, Elizabeth Warren is now admitting she's not Native American, she's not a person of color. So, yes, you got me, I'm really white here. Now, some good news here. Donald Trump and his kids have congratulated the Senate for passing a sweeping criminal justice reform bill. The Senate passed the bill by a vote of 87 to 12 on Tuesday night, and the bill specifically addresses the fact that the war on drugs has led to the imprisonment of way too many Americans for non-violent crimes. Smoke a joint, go to jail. That's about to go away. And the Senate passage gives Trump a signature policy victory. And I think it's a good thing. Because, first of all, if you look at all the states that are legalizing recreational marijuana, and apparently New York is considering it now, people who are in prison for having smoked a joint, they should be let out and reintegrated into our society. They should be allowed to basically go on out, seek work, and start living their lives again. Now, this last election saw the election of 2 Muslim women. And one of them, Rashida Tlaib, who's a Palestinian American, who was unchallenged in her bid to represent Michigan's 13th Congressional District, will wear Palestinian garb for the congressional swearing in. And I saw a photo of what she's going to wear. It is traditional Palestinian, just embroidered all over. Palestine was just known for their incredible embroidery. There was actually, many years ago, a touring exhibit of Palestinian embroidery that was touring around the world, but when it got to Los Angeles, it just somehow magically kind of disappeared. Because it made Palestine look good. It made them look human. It made it look like there really was a culture there. And we can't have that. Israel doesn't like that. Anyway, as I mentioned to this caller earlier before, over at the UK Independent, they ran an article saying that Donald Trump might be the dimmest president the U.S. has ever had. And they're pointing out he does not read except in small doses, and usually when his own name appears prominently. Prior to the presidency, his only activities were real estate work and golf. He doesn't mingle with intellectuals, cultural trendsetters, or artists. And the perception, at least in the writer of this article, is that Trump is sorely lacking in sophistication. Well, we can see that in his Twitter feed. He doesn't seem to have a really good knowledge of the world, understanding of government, and only a rudimentary grasp of economics, which may explain all the times that he went into bankruptcy here. And then they end up saying that Trump remains blissfully ignorant on a range of subjects, and that is definitely not a quality we want in a president. So let's talk about the economic news here. As one of our callers mentioned before, the Fed raised the interest rates again. This is the 4th time since Trump was elected. It raised them 0 times under Obama. And one of the goals may be to slow down Trump's economic boom or possibly even wreck the economy and dump the blame on Donald Trump in order to affect the 2020 elections. Now, I understand that politics is going to exist in any society, but we have evolved to a society where politics dominates absolutely everything, just like the former Soviet Union. But according to this article that came out of Investment Watch blog, to ask the Fed to stop raising rates is to admit the bull market has been nothing but a cheap money debt balloon fantasy construct, which is definitely what it's been. And as I mentioned to that caller before, the Dow ended 351 down. It had been up 200, then down to 400, and then they pushed it back up to 351, negative 351 before the end of the day. But this is not going to go on too much longer before traders are going to panic and liquidate their stock portfolios. And it will happen very, very quickly. It will be a crash. Now, former U.S. Congressman Robert E. Bauman is out there saying that he is expecting a 70% stock market crash in 2019. Now, Bauman is a co-founder of a financial research group that accurately predicted the dot-com crash of 2000, the recession of the early 1990s, and the 1987 crash. And now he's out there saying 70% down. Now, the other day we had a story where Ron Paul was out there saying that just a 50% crash would result in devastation to the lives of ordinary Americans, worse than what happened following the crash of 1929. So get prepared for it. Over at Citigroup, they're facing losses of up to $180 million on loans made to an unnamed Asian hedge fund, which saw major losses on its foreign exchange trades. This is being reported by Bloomberg. And the hedge fund and Citi are in discussions on the positions and how they should be valued, which is usually a bad sign, as when it comes to foreign exchange, the mark-to-market is at least instantaneous. Bloomberg adds the situation is fluid, and the eventual losses may end up being smaller depending upon how the trades are unwound. Over in Saudi Arabia, apparently their latest budget is now out, and apparently experts are saying Saudi Arabia is going bankrupt. Now, during the unveiling of the budget, Saudi King Salman said his country will continue paying public sector cost of living allowances for citizens and will boost spending to stimulate growth, even as Saudi Arabia toils to close its deficit, which it won't do yet again as the kingdom forecasts a 6th consecutive budget deficit in a row. Well, welcome to our world, Saudi Arabia. Those private central bankers, they got you now. Over at Bayer Monsanto, they are bleeding out. Now, when Bayer acquired Monsanto, it was thought this joint company was just going to be an incredible success, that they were going to just rule the world when it comes to biotechnology. Well, it didn't really work out. And the analysts who predicted huge profits from the further monopolization of the pesticide industry blew it. The stock is down 44%. And Bayer is rapidly cutting jobs and selling off their smaller brands in an effort to stay viable amidst all these losses, which I think is a good thing. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that Monsanto lost that case in California. The courts ruled that, yes, indeed, glyphosate was the cause of this cancer in this school groundskeeper. And even though the courts rolled back the settlement, it's still a lot of money, but there are now thousands of these lawsuits piling up. As we mentioned yesterday, Goldman Sachs is facing criminal charges in Malaysia for helping billions to vanish from this state fund, 1MDB. Now, Goldman Sachs is denying the allegation, claiming it was deceived by the previous Malaysian government. Oh, we're the victims here. Remember when Goldman Sachs helped Greece hide its true debt from the EU? And they made millions on the deal, and in the process actually doubled Greece's debt. And then you had the IMF, it was Christine Lagarde came on out and said, we don't care if half of Greece's debt was arrived at through fraud. The Greek people are still responsible for it. Jesse James was right. The real outlaws are the bankers here. Now, over in Facebook land, Mark Zuckerberg has lost $19 billion from the 2018 stock slide of Facebook. And it's, been a devastating year for Facebook. He was worth around $75 billion at the beginning of the year, but he's down to just $56 billion now. So let's all feel sorry for poor old Mark Zuckerberg. Not. Apparently, speaking of Greece, more austerity is to come for them. Hundreds are protesting against the first post-bailout budget. They're very angry about that. The austerity is continuing. Meanwhile, up in Brussels, the EU bureaucrats get huge Christmas bonuses. Oh, they're going to be merry. They're going to be merry. The other day, we ran an article about how the reality for life for most of the Israeli people, and we're talking the Israelis, not the Palestinians, the Israelis, is actually very hard, and that a lot of them are going hungry. Well, it's about to get worse because apparently the cost of living in Israel, which is already one of the highest in the world, is expected to rise again in the new year thanks to the strengthening dollar against the shekel and various government policies. And electricity prices will be the first in line to be affected due to a hike on tariffs for imported raw materials used to produce electric power. This in addition to the $7 billion reform of the electricity sector, which will be financed by the Israeli taxpayer over the next 8 years. So, not too good. Global economist Nouriel Roubini, one of the few who predicted the 2008 financial crisis, is sending a message to Congress saying Bitcoin is the mother of all scams and blockchain is the most hyped tech ever. And basically saying, and we've seen Bitcoin's declines over the last year, and everybody's talking about blockchain. We don't know how robust it is. We don't know if the hackers are going to be able to break into it. But he's sounding the warning saying we need to stop just throwing more high-tech and more digital at everything because it seems to make things worse. Anyway, the Senate is looking at a short-term spending plan to avoid the shutdown Friday. It's going to reach into February. It has no money in it for Trump's wall. Trump apparently has given up his fight against Chuck Schumer, and he will sign the spending deal without the wall. And then we'll get back into the fight over the border wall in February when Nancy Pelosi is presumably Speaker of the House. So Chuck Schumer's taking a victory lap on that one. Now, here's the part that's really kind of interesting. Actually, we're coming up on a commercial break, so I'm going to hold this off until after we come back from these next words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. So, Trump wanted $5 billion to build his border wall, and Democrats, led by Pelosi and Schumer, said absolutely not. And it led to this big fight, potential for a government shutdown, which now looks like it's going to be avoided. And once again, Trump backed down, proving that he is in fact a weak leader. But here's what's really interesting. That border wall was going to cost $5 billion. And yet, the U.S. is sending $10 billion to Mexico and Central America to improve security conditions and job opportunities. Well, why don't we just take that money and build the wall? Why are we having to help Mexico and Central America build job opportunities? Why aren't we building job opportunities in this country? It really doesn't make a lot of sense. I thought Trump was going to make America great again. Now, there's an Air Force veteran down in Florida, triple amputee, Brian Colfag. He's 37 years old, and he's created a GoFundMe account to help fund the border wall. He set a goal of $1 billion, and he's already raised over $500,000. So apparently there are a lot of people out there who also want that wall. Now, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement appears to be gearing up for a massive border invasion. They just issued a new contract to acquire 375 million rounds of tactical rifle ammunition. That is very, very serious stuff. Out in Los Angeles, their new county sheriff, Alex Villanueva, has announced that immigrations and customs enforcement people will be physically removed from all the county jails. So they can't talk to people about, they basically can't do their jobs. Over in Germany, there's a bit of a stir. There's a government ministry, the German Federal Ministry for Family Affairs, and they supported a brochure that aims at changing the behavior of preschool-aged children who are raised by what the brochure's author called right-wing parents who oppose gender theory, sexual diversity, the sexualization of children, and immigration. And Germans are protesting the brochure, calling it unacceptable for the state to intrude into the lives of families. And some are pointing out how this degree of intrusion is similar to what had previously been known in Germany during the times of the Nazis and the communist dictatorships. Apparently, the German government funded this brochure project for 4,600 euros. Okay, we got to take a break here for station identification. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3, and the phone lines are still closed because I'm trying to get through all of these important news items I need to share with you. Over in Germany, and again, this gets back to the open border issue, and apparently through those open borders have come criminal gangs of Arabic origin, and they are now filling their ranks by recruiting some of the other asylum seekers let into the country. And they're basically calling these crime groups clans. And the founders themselves fled war in Lebanon in the 1980s. They have long controlled much of the city's illegal drugs trade, street prostitution, and protection rackets. And now police warn the clans have sought out new members from among the more than 1 million asylum seekers who've arrived in Germany, half from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. So the clans are trying to get others to do the dirty work, such as selling the drugs and committing the small burglaries. Oh yes, what a wonderful thing those open borders are. Okay, now a prominent campaigner, this is about Brexit over in Great Britain. Gina Miller appeared on France 24 as a proponent of a people's vote, saying that in the event of a second referendum, the vote would need to be about the lives of real people. This prompted a furious backlash on social media, basically saying real people already voted. Real people were given a choice about the future of Britain, and real people want to save their nation and their sovereignty. So those who are still pushing for a second referendum apparently are trying to sell the idea that somehow the first referendum really wasn't inclusive enough, that they didn't get out there to what Nixon would call the silent majority here. Now, apparently, the European Parliament's Brexit negotiator, Verhofstadt, has basically overstepped a line, basically coming on in and telling British member of parliaments which way they should be voting or what they should be doing. And Tory Brexiteer member of parliament Steve Double basically lashed out saying, it's not your job to tell members of our parliament what to do. And he warned that the Brussels chief, it will be as much the responsibility of the EU if Britain leaves without a deal, because it has backed Great Britain into an untenable position. Over in Germany, Angela Merkel has been awarded the Fulbright Prize for international understanding. And apparently her strong commitment to mutual understanding, international cooperation, and peace. So the globalists are already out there congratulating each other. You need to understand something about awards. They're not given for merit. They're given to basically fool ordinary people into thinking, oh, I should listen to this person. They've got statues and gold plaques on the wall, and so I should listen to them. And these other people over here who don't have plaques on the wall, I should ignore what they're saying. That's what that's really all about here. Interesting little article that came out of Russia today. Either the European Union ditches neoliberalism or its people will ditch the European Union. That is bang spot on. Because the European Union lives in a world fashioned by Washington, D.C., and as you know, Washington, D.C. is all about neoliberalism and political correctness. In fact, there was a story just on Fox News where 55% of Democrats want more political correctness. So it is starting to come apart. Now, speaking of political correctness, let's cover a few stories on that. We did mention this one before, but apparently schools are now teaching students that boys can have periods. They can menstruate. And teachers who work at the Brighton and Hove City District are going to be asked to explain to their students that all genders can have periods. And the Telegraph calls the decision a victory for transgender rights campaigners. They do not explain it's a major defeat for rational people everywhere. I mean, this LGBT, it's a fantasy world, you know, where there's 30 or 40 different genders and you can change and be whatever you want. I can imagine I'm wealthy. It's not happening. Just because you identify as a tree doesn't make you a tree. Now, there's been a rather troubling development within the cult of LGBT, and it's to have these sort of child, I guess you could call them fashion shows. And I think the whole concept of a child a beauty contest is kind of silly anyway. There was a series about them on, and I don't even remember what it was called, but I was disgusting. And remember JonBenet Ramsey? She was caught up in all of that. Her mother dressed her up and did adult makeup and took her to all these baby beauty pageants and everything. But apparently now they're having these drag queens, and they're using children. And first it was children with autism that were basically done up as drag queens, paraded around a stage, and called modern art. And apparently, this is taking place at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern in London, where LGBT-themed voyeur shows have been taking place since the 1960s, when homosexuality wasn't even legal in the United Kingdom. So now they're moving on from kids with autism. Now it's kids with Down syndrome. And they're taking men with Down syndrome, they're doing them up in makeup and dancing around in front of a live audience. I think this borders on pornography. And the deep state-owned corporate media couldn't be happier and full of praise. They're calling it a beautiful display of art. No, it isn't. They're exploiting these kids, the ones with autism, the ones with Down syndrome. It's not a work of art. We're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Okay, Mount Holyoke College is an all-women's college. Keep that in mind. And they wanted to commission a new logo for the school that included the initials MHC sideways so that the H and the C formed the female gender symbol, known as the Venus symbol. Well, this angered the students and alumni who don't identify as women, and the school was forced to apologize and withdraw the logo design. Well, if these students don't identify as women, why are they enrolling in a women's college? That doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. Okay. Over at Stanford, one of their medical students has been reported to the university's Title IX office. Now, Title IX is supposed to be how allegations of sexual misconduct are handled. But apparently, this guy was reported to the Title IX office just for making pro-life remarks on campus. And the Title IX office claimed there was not an active investigation into his conduct, but they admitted they wanted to speak to him to ensure he was meeting the expectations of all Stanford community members. In other words, to enforce the groupthink. You're not allowed to have independent thoughts anymore in colleges and universities. It was quite the opposite when I was in college. Okay. Author Diana Rowland, in the spirit of Christmas, decided to deck her halls with 3 large and colorful inflated dragons in the front yard. And this prompted a furious response from the neighborhood, who sent her all these notes saying, maybe these would be appropriate for Halloween, but they're not appropriate for Christmas. They're not appropriate for Christmas, and you should do something about them. So she went out and she put Santa Claus hats on all of them. Okay. Over in Washington State, there's been another brouhaha over a nativity scene. It's been displayed in this Washington State public park for the last 40 years, until this year when there was a handful of complaints, and as a result, the nativity scene has been moved to a privately owned vacant lot. And Woodland officials told the station they didn't want to move the long-standing display from Horseshoe Lake Park, but did so when they considered the legal ramifications of keeping it on public property. Now, what's really interesting, if you think about it, this idea of banning nativity scenes on public property, I think that goes back to 1986. And it was a Supreme Court decision that was handed down saying Christian symbols could not be displayed on public property. The same Supreme Court ruled that it was okay to display a menorah on public property during Hanukkah. Talk about invading and displacing here. Story coming out of 12160. They're reporting on this opinion that has come on out on social media. People should not be hired based on their ability to perform a job because it ostracizes those with no skill. And that has no place in an inclusive society, which is great. I mean, that's how I like my doctors hired. You know, no skills. Or flight controllers or pilots or anything like that. If you get down that road where your skills don't matter anymore, just you fit into the slot of correct gender, correct ethnic group, correct religion, correct whatever, you have taken away all incentive for students to study. Why should they study? Their skill set won't mean anything. That's how insane our society has become. The whole point of school is to educate young people to take their place in the next generation when they take over the world. And you want them to know as much as they can know so that they can do good jobs when they get out there. And you want to take the students who worked really hard and learned skills, you want to give them the jobs where those skills are needed. But to come on out and say that you shouldn't consider skill levels when hiring somebody because it makes the less skilled feel ostracized, well, maybe that will convince those with less skills to do something about it. We're seeing this trend going across America where schools are no longer handing out grades because they don't want the underachievers to feel left out or feel excluded. Well, maybe if you went back to giving out grades, some of those students with lower grades would work harder. That's the way it's supposed to work, to motivate them. Okay, over in Florida, the holistic doctor, Russell T. Bain, newly married and full of life, allegedly decided to commit suicide, taking his own life. There are no witnesses. Little to nothing was written up about him. There was no suicide note. 4 days after his death, his funeral services were held, which is awfully quick. Now, Dr. Bain practiced medicine for 27 years and was the founder of the Florida Medical Marijuana Institute, and he dispensed CBD oil to his patients. He was legally authorized to prescribe medical marijuana for children and adults with qualifying medical conditions. And he basically had a huge amount of success with CBD oil and medical marijuana. Bain believed in CBD because he'd seen the results for people who were suffering from lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, neuropathy, diabetes, anxiety, insomnia, combination of those, also chronic pain. Well, gee whiz, I wonder who would feel threatened by that enough to want to assassinate the man. Over in El Paso County, blood tests are showing that residents have high levels of toxic chemicals from contaminated water. And this affects primarily the Security, Whitefield, and Fountain area. And they have these high levels of toxic chemicals compared with other Americans. And apparently the source of the water contamination is from firefighting foam used for decades at Peterson Air Force Base. So that's where it's coming from. Now, remember Aaron Brockovich fought that battle against PG&E over the chromium 6 hexavalent chromium at the town of Hinckley? Had a movie made about her. She's now a first supporter of clean water. And she's warning that there is an emerging drinking water crisis in the U.S. Right after the story of water contamination in Flint, Michigan came on out, she started a project to test water from all over the United States. And the results are in. A lot of the water coming out of your taps can be dangerous. Now, down in Venezuela, we're seeing a case study of why the Second Amendment matters, because as things get worse there and the people get more arrested, they've been disarmed. They were disarmed by their government that is now free to do whatever they feel they need to do to stay in power. All right, we're going to open the phone lines, and we're going to take a phone call from Dave in Missouri. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha and howdy, Mike. It's been a minute. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing great.
Good, good. I hope Claire's doing well, and you all have great Christmas plans. I want to wish the RBN listening audience a very Merry Christmas. Please support RBN. Don't forget, liberty is not free. freedom is not free. We have to invest in those who are on the gatepost. We've got to support folks like Mike. We've got to support RBN. So please do this Christmas season. I'm begging you, and I got no nothing in this fight except that I care about liberty and I care about freedom, and I know that it takes money to secure both. And so, and unfortunately, isn't it, Mike, that everything in this life now is so tied to the dollar, man? I mean, they've really done a great job of encapsulating the gerbil trap to encase us all in the treadmill run to our death for their profit. It's just gross. I wish there were another way, but that's the reality we're in. Brother, I got to ask you, and I know you've covered this at length, but I've been stepped out and away for a minute. I kind of had to for many reasons. But do you think the Syria thing is real? And could this be I hate to put any faith in anything anymore. Could this be a stepping stone to maybe Iraq, Afghanistan, et cetera, ad nauseum, get us the hell out of these places where we just murder the innocent and steal their natural resources, and then the CIA traffics in all the heroin that they can produce? Come on. I mean, but if you think about how many layers of the bankers' financial fraud that the heroin influx and the opiate addiction finances, from hospitals to what do they call that, recovery, whatever that garbage is, through the private prisons, and on and on and on. I don't think that they can let that go, because too many communities now have been so looted and gutted by Walmart made in China. There's no investment locally pouring back into economic coffers at the county level, except for the courthouse to railroad and just beat the hell out of the poor people, to tax them on these jails, on these never-ending probations. I come from the poorest county in Missouri with the highest bail. How does that happen? I mean, I know a kid, 24 years old, total stuffed-up charge, has a $350,000 bail.
Okay, Dave, I'm sorry. We got to take a commercial break. I'm going to have to let you go here. Thank you very much. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, there is this situation here in Baton Rouge, actually in Louisiana, where these former police officers have now been charged after a leaked video showed them slamming a middle school student to the ground twice, and another one thrusting the student's face into a desk. And the officers are facing minor charges. The student's family believes the charges are a slap on the wrist. And but at least they've been fired, and at least there's the beginning of charging police who behave badly. All right, let's see. Let's hang on a second. Okay, there's yet another scandal coming out of Facebook, and apparently Netflix and Spotify could read private messages, and Yandex was given IDs. And this discovery goes far beyond the Cambridge Analytica data harvesting scandal, in which basic data was collected on up to 87 million users through a lifestyle survey app. Thanks to the United States having no general consumer privacy law, up to 400 million people's private information was freely shared with the likes of Google, Microsoft, Netflix, Spotify, and other partners. And they didn't sell it. Facebook gave everybody's information away for free throughout the tech community in order to foster industry relationships and advance their own interests. And apparently, Facebook also allowed Microsoft search engine Bing to see the names of nearly all users' friends without their consent. So definitely having a consumer protection law would be a very, very good thing here. Over in Windows land, there was that timeline feature where you could basically scroll back to any point and recover your work as it was at that time. But you have the option to turn it off. Well, apparently somebody has realized that Windows 10 goes on slurping your data even when you've turned this feature off. It goes on unabated off to the servers at Microsoft here. Microsoft is now admitting normal users are testing unstable updates, and they're explaining the way by saying that if you voluntarily hit the check for updates in Windows 10, it opts you into the beta releases, so that you are now unpaid quality assurance inspectors for the Microsoft Corporation. Now, over the last year, Microsoft has been pushing the subscription model for 365. And this coming year, they're going to be pushing it for home users. They want to get away from this idea of you just buying software and having it. They want to turn software into a month-to-month rental situation. Now, here's an interesting little story. This is coming out of ZDNet, and it's talking about the possibility that Microsoft might release a desktop Linux. They call it MS Linux or Lindows. And it may be a smart move because it's obvious from Windows 10 that their core technology has grown to a point where they really can't maintain and manage it properly. Now, Apple, of course, made this decision many years ago. They abandoned their original Apple OS, and all of their operating systems since then are based on the Linux operating system, and they have far fewer problems. Charter Spectrum apparently lost their lawsuit in New York. They're having to pay a record $174 million fine and give huge refunds to their New York customers, along with free premium channels for a while. And this is a result of the fact that Spectrum was advertising high internet access speed and charging for them, but failing to deliver, which is a problem that we have here in Hawaii. We pay for 300 megabits per second. We're only getting about 60. So in New York, at least, they're going to start waking up, and hopefully it's going to send a message to internet service providers that they better be prepared to deliver what it is they intend to, or what they're marketing, what they're selling here. Now, the U.S. supermarket chain Kroger Company said on Tuesday it started using an unmanned autonomous vehicle, actually more than one, to deliver groceries in Scottsdale, Arizona, in partnership with the Silicon Valley startup Neuro. The delivery service follows a pilot program started by the companies in Scottsdale in August and involved Neuro's R1, a custom unmanned vehicle that uses public roads, has no drivers, and it's only used to transport goods. Passengers cannot ride in it. And by now you've probably heard about this horrible accident that took place in China where a robot malfunctioned and skewered a worker with 10 huge steel spikes. All right, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we just got a nasty Christmas surprise. We've just been informed our rent is being raised $300 a month, which is going to put a real strain on us. Anyway, apparently reports are emerging from inside Syria that a deal has been struck between the U.S. and Iran, where once the United States fully withdraws from Syria, so will Iran. Well, that ought to make Israel happy. Getting on back to the world of computers and computer science, this article is probably going to weird a lot of you out here. Apparently, the U.S. ballistic missile systems have very poor cybersecurity. There's no data encryption, no antivirus programs, no multi-factor authentication mechanisms, and 28-year-old unpatched vulnerabilities are just some of the cybersecurity failings described in a security audit of the U.S. ballistic missile system released on Friday by the U.S. Department of Defense Inspector General. And apparently the DoD IG inspected 5 random locations where the Missile Defense Agency had placed ballistic missiles as part of the ballistic missile defense system. This is the DoD program developed to protect U.S. territories by launching ballistic missiles to intercept enemy nuclear rockets. Remember that big stink that came on out a couple of years ago where it turned out that all of the launch codes and all of those missile silos had been set to all zeros, because simulations had shown that under the stress of thinking there was an attack, that the technicians were mistyping the launch codes. So, apparently over at Tumblr, they have announced that all adult content is to be permanently removed from the site. In fact, they announced it on the 3rd. It was done on the 17th. And meanwhile, Internet archivists were trying to basically copy it all off before it was lost forever here. Over at the University of California, Berkeley, they're developing a tool that uses artificial intelligence to identify hate speech on social media, a program that researchers hope will outperform human beings in identifying bigoted comments on Twitter, Reddit, and other online platforms. The scientists at Berkeley's D-Lab are working in cooperation with the Anti-Defamation League on a scalable detection system, the Online Hate Index, to identify hate speech. So it's basically going to filter anything that is anti-Israel or pro-Palestinian. Do you have an Amazon Alexa in your home? Do you also have a parrot? Because if you do, you should keep the two wide apart. Over in Oxfordshire, United Kingdom, Rocco the African Grey has learned how to use the Alexa and is ordering items from Amazon, such as strawberries, watermelon, raisins, broccoli, and ice cream. Yet another reason to not have those things in your home. I mean the Alexa, not the parrot here. Out in California, the Pacific Gas and Electric is now proposing a $2 billion rate hike to fund what they're calling wildlife safety, which is to go in and do all the maintenance and safety stuff that should have been done all along. So those poor people who are in those areas, many of whom lost their homes and suffered major damage, now they're going to see a major increase in their electric bill. Down in Australia, they've come up with a new little device to try and reduce the amount of wildlife that are killed by cars and passing traffic. And it's called the virtual fence. And basically, it's these small alarm units at 80-foot intervals along the edge of a road. When the alarms detect a car coming, they emit sirens and flashing lights so that animals will be scared away from the highway, which sounds really good. And because the units are facing away from the road, their lights do not interfere with a person's driving. Now, here is a really good story. Fluoride, which probably think of as, dental health and everything, it has a high energy density. And fluoride has been used in battery chemistry all the way back in the 1970s, but it could only be made to work in solid-state batteries which operate at much higher temperatures than conventional devices. In other words, they had to be very, very hot. But there's apparently been a breakthrough in fluoride battery chemistry that allows them to operate at room temperature. And they will, in theory, charge faster and hold 8 times as much energy as a comparable lithium battery. And that's probably going to be good news for the Tesla Corporation, because apparently a brand new Tesla Model S spontaneously combusted not once, but twice. Apparently it was sitting in a tire shop parking lot near the Bay Area and simply burst into flames. The fire department arrived, they put the fire out, the Tesla was subsequently towed away. It then reignited a second time at the tow yard. Now, the owner of the tire shop said that after the vehicle was brought in on a tow truck, they noticed a hissing sound coming from it before the vehicle went up in flames. And the batteries in the vehicle continued to burn long after the flames were put out. Now, there has been a problem with batteries, lithium batteries. The 777 had issues with it, and the Teslas had it as well. But Elon Musk, undeterred, is already out on his next venture. This involves the Boring Company. And he wants to basically build a new Los Angeles tunnel system where your car turns into a rail-guided train and zooms along at 150 miles per hour. And Elon Musk is saying it will feel like teleporting within a city. Well, good luck, Elon, if he can make it work here. Story out of Human Beings First, the global warming psyops that people don't get. And it's reminding us that there is an overarching social political theory behind this whole global warming propaganda, and that is the construction of a one world government. And that entails, inter alia, how mankind should be organized, governed, their attitudes and behavior changed in a massive reboot of all civilizations into a single standardized civilization with a standardized new religion, new habits, new lifestyles, and much of the planet Earth off limits to the vast masses of humanity in the name of preserving nature, wildlife, environment, and Gaia for future generations. Individual rights to be subsumed under community rights, private property rights abolished for the public, and so forth. And I've been saying all along, that's really a big part of what that issue is, to bring about a global social change. Meanwhile, of course, in the world of global warming, several strong storms targeted British Columbia with snow, ice, and wind. And forecast right now is that there's probably going to be another blizzard on the northeast of the United States on Christmas Day. Now, 10 years ago, Al Gore warned the North Polar ice cap would be completely gone by the year 2013. And in case you haven't looked recently, it is still, in fact, there. Apparently, the polar vortex is back, and saying researchers are saying it could hit the United States and Canada with extremely frigid temperatures either by the end of this month or in January. Now, there's always been polar vortexes, but the global warming people are out there trying to act like this is something new and unexpected, and that's the only reason why their prognostications of snow-free winters didn't come to fruition. Oh, it's that gosh darn polar vortex. Now, next year, scientists funded by Bill Gates are going to spray particles high into the sky in an experiment to dim the sun. Geoengineering has moved from the realm of conspiracy theory to an actual congressional debate. Now, first of all, I don't think they should be doing this because the reality is the world is getting colder. And Bill Gates' little, I'm going to tinker with the planet like it's a PC, is just going to make things worse. Meanwhile, former New York mayor and possible 2020 candidate Michael Bloomberg has flown several giant blocks of ice from Greenland to London for a public demonstration of how climate change affects the polar ice caps. Boy, they're just laying this on with a trowel. The Canadian Coast Guard is reporting that Atlantic ice in Canada is increasing. The extreme cold temperatures and the high winds have been combining to expand the Arctic ice. There is a natural cycle to this, and they've reported that the seasonal freeze-up is occurring 3 to 4 weeks ahead of schedule and above the 30-year average. This winter is once again extremely cold. Message to Bill Gates. All right, like I said, we're in the last week before Christmas here. People are doing their shopping, and there are things you need to be looking out for. Target and Walmart have been sued for selling lead-contaminated toys. And apparently the lawsuit was filed in Albany County Supreme Court, alleges the companies violated multiple New York State laws, including those related to selling hazardous toys, as well as deceptive acts and false advertising by importing, distributing, selling, or holding for sale thousands of what are called Crazy Jewels kits in New York. CRA-Z-J-E-W-E-L-Z. This happened between 2015 and 2016. The suit seeks civil penalties from retailers and LaRose for the alleged violations, and a court order to require the companies to implement additional measures to ensure they do not again sell children's toys containing high levels of lead in New York. Now, probably if you have children, you're familiar with what are called the slime toys. And it's predicted to be a Christmas bestseller, but apparently it's been identified as a health risk. Nearly half of the products offered by stores were found to contain potentially harmful levels of boron. And apparently overexposure to boron can cause skin irritation, diarrhea, vomiting, and cramps. Now, this borax is a common ingredient in slime that helps create its stickiness. So the stickier the slime is, the worse it probably is. All right, we're going to take a phone call from Mateus in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, what's on my mind is the UN Migration Pact. And
yes.
I'm really upset about this. I mean, thankfully for you guys in the States, you can sign on to it. So it's not an issue. But for most of the countries, it is extremely upsetting. We have a situation where, just like when the EU was being set up, it was just a simple trade agreement. Oh, a non-binding trade agreement, I'm sure. Right? So this whole thing about non-binding bullshit, it's going to be binding. And so to be giving the entire third world a human right to migrate to Canada as much as they want, and then it describes right in this pact that they also will have full equal citizenship rights to everybody here. So read between the lines, that means voting, which means we'll never win another election again. We've got about until next October to vote out Trudeau, but by then he'll be able to import enough people. Like, I don't think the States is ever going to win an election again, because the elections are just no more than taking a poll of the demographics. It's like you run a census every 2 and 4 years. It's really all it is. We like to think that we're making a difference in changing politics with our actions. It's just it's just the demographic census. That's why they're bringing in the immigrants. Now, Trudeau gave away $600 million, almost $600 million, to prop up the failing establishment media. So all the people that are lying to us and that are telling us that this is good for us and that we want to be invaded and that we don't want to have a country anymore and that it's really strengthening us to bring in the third world and that, you know, Ebola and the Black Plague and vaginal mutilation is a good idea and we like all that, those people are going out of business because we're not complete idiots up here. So, to stop them from going out of business, Trudeau is stealing $600 million, which, by the way, we only have like about 35 million people here, right? So that would be like $600 million. And it's actually more real money here. We don't go around the world with the military empire telling people that they want to keep loaning us money. We don't run the global reserve system. Like, it's real money. $600 million will make a real difference to every Canadian. And then if you look into this migration pact, it talks about suppressing opposition to migration. It's encouraging the governments to make it illegal. Like, this phone call could be illegal soon for me. It could be the same as if I was talking about Jewish supremacy on the show.
Yes.
So this is the end of Canada if we don't do something about it. In Belgium, the Belgian people are not idiots either. They know it's the end of Belgium. So that's why the Belgian prime minister or president, whatever it's called, had to resign because the Belgian people are actually much smarter than Canadians and they freaked out.
Well, they're much more active than Canadians. I'm sure the Canadians are very, very smart, but Canadians have a reputation for being very polite and very, very low-key. I mean, Michael Moore made fun of that during the film Canadian Bacon.
Well, we're like psychologically conquered already. We're so pacified, like a bunch of cattle, that I don't know if we would ever fight back. That's one of the reasons we're allowed to have a few guns, is because we're considered like psychologically conquered already.
Okay.
So this is just simply the New World Order globalist agenda to create a one world government requires all the borders to be dropped, and anyone who puts up a fight has to be taken out. And so it's the first world countries that will put up a fight. So that's why, really, China, Russia, America, Canada, and a few other countries have to be demolished, scheduled for demolition. And that's why the New World Order hates Trump so much, is because he's actually not 100% going along with demolishing his country. Whereas Trudeau is bending right over.
And neither will Russia and China. Anyway, I got to let you go. We got to take our last commercial break of the show here. And we'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Last segment of our program today. We're talking about things you should keep an eye out for when you're doing your Christmas shopping here. Apparently, Zarbee's vitamins have come under some suspicion. Apparently, metal shavings were found in a toddler's intestines after eating these Zarbee's multivitamins, which is a product from Johnson & Johnson. Now, lately, we have been seeing all of these recalls of food products, and yet the FDA is still out there insisting our food supply has never been safer. We had 12 million pounds of ground beef recalled from JBS Tolson, and they were contaminated with salmonella. And some of the brands included in the recall were Kroger, Cedar River Farms, Comnor Perfect Choice, Gourmet Burger, Grass Run Farms Natural Beef, JBS Generic, Laura's Lean Beef, Private Selection, and Showcase. Then there was that 30,000 pounds of Jimmy Dean breakfast sausage recalled for pieces of metal that was in there. Meanwhile, Del Monte canned corn has been recalled for potential botulism, 64,000 cases. And the FDA insists our food has never been safer. That's absolutely a joke here. Okay, now, getting on down here, let's see. Excuse me, I'm having trouble with my... There we are. Okay. As you know, we're seeing a lot of these very high church officials getting drummed out, if you will, over these sexual shenanigans, as it were. And apparently Pope Francis has accepted the resignation of Los Angeles Auxiliary Bishop Monsignor Alexander Salazar following historic allegations of misconduct with a minor. The Vatican announced the resignation in a one-line statement, giving no details of the incident. The current Archbishop of Los Angeles, Most Reverend Jose Gomez, said the Archdiocese was made aware of the claim in 2005 with what happened dating back to the 1990s. Gomez said prosecutors declined to bring charges, but the Archdiocese forwarded the complaint to the Vatican office that handles sex abuse cases, at which point they filed it under not to be opened again here. Gomez said that the office, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, imposed precautionary measures against Salazar, and a further investigation found the allegation to be credible. By the way, in the past, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith was known as the Office of the Inquisition. Up in Illinois, the Attorney General has found that the Catholic Church hid abuse accusations against 500 more priests. It is time for somebody somewhere to address this issue. Okay, there's the music. Time for Claire and I to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back to... stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. Please put something in RBN's Christmas stocking. Please put something in my Christmas stocking. And we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.